In the quiet mansion overlooking the waters of Seattle, silence weighed heavier than the waves outside. Nathan Carter, a billionaire father, lived there with his only daughter, Emma, an 8-year-old who had once been the heart of every room she entered. But since the tragic accident that claimed her mother's life and left her confined to a wheelchair, Emma had retreated into herself. Her laughter had vanished, her bright spirit dimmed, and even the smallest joys seemed beyond her reach. Nathan, despite all his wealth and power, found himself powerless against the grief that shadowed their home. Into this fragile world stepped Claire Johnson, a young woman whose kindness carried more strength than any fortune could buy. Unlike others who saw Emma's chair before they saw her, Claire met the little girl with warmth, patience, and genuine care. She noticed what Nathan could not, that Emma's silence was not stubbornness, but sorrow waiting for someone to listen. Day by day, Claire brought small changes, a smile at breakfast, gentle words at bedtime, moments of play disguised as healing. Slowly, she began to break through the invisible walls Emma had built. For Nathan, it was both humbling and astonishing to watch. The mansion that had felt like a tomb of memories started to stir with life again. Through Claire's presence, Emma discovered glimpses of joy she thought were gone forever. And for the father who had nearly lost hope, Claire became proof that sometimes, the right person doesn't just enter your home, they change the meaning of family itself. The morning of Emma Carter's birthday had been prepared with more care than most royal banquets. Claire Johnson had spent hours arranging every detail, streamers in soft pastels strung from the ceiling, balloons clustered neatly at the long dining table, and 12 golden paper crowns carefully placed at each seat, waiting for little hands to wear them. The cake, a 3-tiered masterpiece, crowned with delicate sugar roses, stood proudly in the center as if it were the centerpiece of a dream. Everything looked perfect, except for the one thing no decoration could guarantee: guests. Emma sat at the head of the table in a lilac dress, her hair brushed smooth with a single silver clip holding back her curls. Her eyes, bright with fragile hope, kept flicking toward the doorway each time the faint echo of the doorbell rang. Each time, she lifted her head with anticipation, only for her expression to sink when no one entered. Claire, watching closely, felt her heart tighten. She knelt beside Emma, smoothing the folds of her dress. "Maybe they're just running late," Claire said gently, though she already knew the truth. Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. "They promised they'd come." Claire had seen how the little girl had held on to those invitations days earlier, clutching them like treasures at school pickup. She had hoped so deeply that her classmates would see her, not as the girl in the chair, but simply as Emma, their friend. Yet now, as the minutes dragged into nearly an hour and every seat remained empty, the cruel reality pressed down on her. The accident had changed more than Emma's ability to walk, it had changed how the world treated her. By the time the clock chimed again, the cake still untouched, Emma's voice trembled as she whispered, "Maybe they forgot." "They didn't forget, sweetheart," Claire said softly, even though she doubted her own words. She squeezed Emma's hand, refusing to let this day dissolve into heartbreak. "You and we're not going to let an empty room ruin your birthday. Not today." Emma tilted her head, her eyes searching Claire's face. "Then what do we do?" Claire leaned closer, her lips curving into a conspiratorial smile. "We make our own party." Before Emma could respond, Claire wheeled her gently into the center of the room, tapped her phone, and let music fill the silence. The lively beat broke through the heavy air. "First," Claire announced dramatically, "we dance." At first Emma gave a shy, uncertain laugh. But Claire spun her chair in playful circles, dipping and twirling, as if the two of them were gliding through an invisible ballroom. "Where are we right now?" Claire asked over the music. Emma thought for a moment, then whispered, "A castle." "No," Claire corrected, her eyes twinkling. "A kingdom. And you, Your Highness, are the bravest princess in the land." Something in Emma lit up. She threw her hand slightly into the air as Claire twirled her. Faster, and laughter, real, unguarded laughter, escaped her lips for the first time in months. The games flowed from one to another. Claire announced each new royal decree with exaggerated trumpet sounds, transforming the kitchen into a grand banquet hall, and presenting cupcakes as magical treasures from far-off lands. Emma giggled, playing along. She bit into a vanilla cupcake and declared, "This one makes you fly." Claire laughed, delighted. "Then this one," she said, placing another before her, "makes everyone tell the truth." Emma's smile softened. "Even the people who stopped talking to you?" Claire's chest ached, but she didn't let the moment fade. Especially them, she replied with conviction. When the music slowed, Claire pulled out a basket of costume pieces, feather boas, sparkling tiaras, oversized sunglasses. "We need royal portraits," she announced. Emma eagerly chose a glittering crown for Claire, while Claire crowned Emma with a wide-brimmed floppy hat. They snapped selfies, made ridiculous faces, and laughed until Emma's cheeks flushed pink. Somewhere between poses, Emma's expression grew thoughtful. She studied Claire through her oversized glasses and suddenly said, "You're the only one who makes me feel like I still matter." The words struck Claire like a quiet thunderclap. She held the phone loosely in her hand, her smile softening into something gentler. "Emma," she whispered, "you will always matter. Always." The rest of the afternoon carried on with laughter, cupcakes, and silly costumes, until the sun began to dip, painting the room in golden light. Balloons sagged toward the floor. Lemonade. Glasses stood half empty, and crumbs dotted the table. But Emma didn't notice any of it. She had been given something greater than a party with 12 absent friends. She had been given joy again, something she had almost forgotten existed. Later, as the games wound down and the room quieted, Emma touched Claire's arm. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course," Claire said warmly. "I wish you were my mom." The words were so simple, spoken without hesitation, but they carried the weight of a truth, too deep for a child to explain. Claire felt them pierce her heart, filling her with both warmth and ache. That was the moment Nathan, Emma's father, stepped into the doorway. He had come home early, his jacket slung over one arm, only to freeze at the sight before him, his daughter. Flushed with laughter, leaning toward Claire as though she were the safest place in the world. He had heard Emma's words, and though his face was unreadable, something in his eyes cracked open. For months, Nathan had struggled to reach his daughter, only to be met with silence and distance. Yet here she was, her cheeks glowing with life again, all because of the young woman who had refused to let one empty birthday table define the day. It was in that moment, standing at the threshold of his own home, that Nathan realized something had shifted. Not just for Emma, but for him as well. What Claire had given his daughter was more than a party. It was the reminder that love, even from a stranger, could stitch broken pieces back together. And as Emma giggled again, spinning once more in her chair to the rhythm of the fading music, Nathan knew he was witnessing something far greater than balloons, cakes, or crowns. He was watching the rebirth of his daughter's joy. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the tall windows, washing the living room in a warm, golden glow. The remnants of the improvised birthday celebration still lingered half empty. Glasses of pink lemonade, paper crowns scattered on the floor, and balloons drifting lazily against the ceiling. Emma Carter's cheeks were flushed from laughter, her lilac dress slightly wrinkled from hours of games and dancing. Claire Johnson sat beside her, brushing a stray curl from the girl's forehead as they caught their breath between bursts of silliness. It was in that pause, in the fragile stillness that followed so much joy, that Emma's small hand reached for Claire's. Her eyes clear, unguarded for the first time in months, lifted and met Claire's. And with a quiet certainty that only children possess, she said, "I wish you were my mom." The words hung in the air, simple and unadorned, yet carrying the weight of all the grief Emma had never spoken aloud. For a heartbeat, Claire froze. She hadn't expected it, though. She had sensed Emma inching closer, trusting her in ways she never dared with others. Claire's throat tightened, her chest swelling with both warmth and sorrow. She managed a soft smile, her voice low and steady. "Emma, you will always matter. And I will always care for you." What Claire didn't know was that someone else had heard. Standing just inside the doorway, half hidden by the shadow of the frame, was Nathan Carter. He had returned home earlier than expected, still holding his jacket over one arm, his tie loosened as if he had planned to pass through unnoticed. But the moment he stepped into the room, the sight stopped him cold. His daughter, who for so long had kept her heart locked behind silence and grief, was laughing again, laughing, and leaning toward Claire as though she were the anchor Emma had been waiting for. And then he heard the words, "I wish you were my mom." The sentence struck him like a blow and a bomb all at once. For months, Nathan had tried to reach his daughter through toys, gifts, even forced conversations, but none of it had mattered. The walls around her had only thickened. Yet here was proof, clear and undeniable, that someone else had stepped into that space effortlessly. Claire had done what he could not. She had given Emma back her laughter, her trust, her sense of belonging. Nathan's chest tightened, conflicted emotions surging all at once. A stab of jealousy, sharp and unwelcome, whispered that his daughter had found in another woman what she no longer looked for in him. But layered over that was something heavier, more profound. Gratitude. Gratitude that someone had reached her at all, that Emma was not lost forever in her grief. Gratitude that Claire had chosen not to treat Emma as fragile glass, but as a child still capable of joy. For the first time since the accident, Nathan felt the ice inside him begin to crack. He had buried himself in business meetings, in endless schedules, in the illusion that keeping the 4A mansion orderly meant keeping life under control. Yet none of that had touched Emma's broken spirit. Now, standing in the quiet doorway, he realized that true healing could not be bought or managed. It came in small, imperfect moments like cupcakes eaten with laughter, like silly dances in the living room, like a little girl's whispered wish. Emma, sensing her father's presence at last, straightened in her chair, her face quickly shifting to something more guarded. The sparkle of joy dimmed slightly, as though she feared she had been caught in something forbidden. "Daddy," she said softly, her voice carrying both hope and caution. Nathan swallowed hard, forcing his features into something neutral even as his heart ached. "Looks like you had a successful party," he said, his voice awkward in the silence. Claire met his gaze, unflinching. "We made our own kind of party," she replied gently. The words pierced deeper than she knew. Nathan's chest ached at the truth of them, not just because Emma had found joy without the crowd of classmates who never came, but because the two of them, together, had created something far more meaningful. A memory not of absence, but of resilience. As Emma's wheelchair spun in a small circle under Claire's playful guidance, Nathan found himself clapping softly, not for the spin itself, but for the bravery it symbolized. His daughter had laughed today. She had played. She had dared to wish again. And all of it had happened because of the woman now sitting at her side, her hand resting gently on the chair's handle, like it belonged there. Nathan stood at the threshold a moment longer, his grip tightening around his jacket. He realized, with unsettling clarity, that he wanted to hold on to this moment, to freeze it before it slipped away. The mansion that had echoed with silence for so long now carried the sound of his daughter's laughter, and the soft presence of a woman who had stepped in like light through a cracked door. Later that evening, long after Emma had been tucked into bed, Nathan sat alone in his study. The house was quiet again, but it was no longer the same silence. His mind replayed the afternoon in sharp fragments. Emma's unguarded laugh, the twirl of her chair, the golden crown strewn across the floor, and the small, devastatingly honest sentence, "I wish you were my mom." He pressed his palms to his eyes, overwhelmed not by failure, but by the realization that he no longer had to carry this burden alone. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that healing might be possible, not just for Emma, but for him as well. Claire had opened a door. Neither of them knew how to unlock, and Nathan, humbled and uncertain, found himself wanting to step through. In that moment, he understood something he had resisted for too long. Sometimes it isn't strength that saves a family, but love. And love had just entered his home in the form of a prostitute woman who refused to give up on his daughter. The mornings in the Carter mansion slowly transformed from heavy silences into quiet rituals, stitched together by the gentle presence of Claire Johnson. At first, it was simple. She would rise before dawn, move through the kitchen with practiced care, and prepare breakfast in a way that seemed less about food and more about creating space. Plates were set neatly, fruit cut into small bowls, syrup placed where Emma could reach it without asking. By the time the little girl's wheelchair hummed softly against the polished floor, Claire was always ready, as though she had been expecting her. "Good morning, Your Highness," Claire would say lightly, a smile tugging at her lips. Emma's responses were hesitant at first, shrugs, half smiles, single words. Yet Claire never rushed her, never demanded more than what Emma was ready to give. Instead, she offered choices. Small ones that gave Emma control again. "Blueberry pancakes or cinnamon oatmeal?" she might ask, sliding a warm mug of milk closer. Slowly, Emma began to answer with more than just a nod. One morning, as she considered her options, Emma glanced up and asked, "What's your favorite breakfast?" The question startled Claire, though she hid it well. It wasn't the food that mattered, it was the shift behind the question. Emma, who for months had withdrawn from the world, was reaching outward again. Claire leaned on the counter, pretending to ponder deeply. "Depends who I'm sharing it with," she said finally. Emma's lips curved into a small grin, and the conversation moved on, but the moment lingered in Claire's heart like a quiet victory. Over the days that followed, these mornings became the heartbeat of the house. Emma asked. More questions, small ones at first, then deeper ones. Why do you always wear your hair up? What's your favorite color? Do you like it here? Each time, Claire answered. Honestly, never dismissing the curiosity as childish or unimportant. When Emma admitted she thought Claire must love the color blue, because she wore it so often, Claire chuckled softly. Blue is for work. Yellow is for me. The kind of yellow that looks like summer mornings. Emma stored that answer away, her eyes bright with the knowledge that she now knew. Something personal about Claire. What neither of them realized was that Nathan often stood in the hallway, just out of sight, listening. He had started to linger there, coffee mug in hand, long before he admitted to himself why. It was the sound of Emma's voice, lighter, freer, that drew him. For months, he had barely heard her speak more than a few clipped words. But with Claire, Emma's words spilled into the room like sunlight creeping through shutters. Nathan both ached and marveled at it. One morning, when Claire found Emma tucked into the library corner with her sketchbook, she paused at the doorway. On the page, written carefully in uneven letters, was her name, Claire. Just beneath it, slightly larger, Emma had written, Mom. Claire's throat tightened, though she forced her voice to stay calm. That's a beautiful way to practice handwriting, she said softly. Emma startled, quickly mumbling, I just thought the words looked nice together. Claire didn't press. Instead, she sat down beside her, pulled a blank page, and began sketching a daisy. Soon, Emma was filling the rest of the page with flowers of her own. They colored together in silence until Emma whispered, It's better this way. Because we're doing it together. Later that night, when Nathan came to check on his daughter, he noticed the sketchbook left on her desk. Flipping it open, he froze. There, surrounded by colorful flowers, were the words, Claire. Mom. His chest tightened with a mix of emotions he couldn't untangle, envy that Emma had given this title to someone else, gratitude that she had finally let someone in, and longing for the ease Claire seemed to bring into their lives. For hours, Nathan couldn't stop replaying the image. He thought of all the times he had tried to bridge the gap with Emma and failed. And yet, Claire had done it without forcing, without pleading. She had simply listened, simply stayed. The following morning, he passed the kitchen earlier than usual, and heard Emma asking, Claire, do you like books or movies better? He lingered in the hallway, his heart tightening. Again at the sound of his daughter's voice so alive, so curious. But this time, instead of retreating, he stepped inside. You'll be late for school, he said lightly. Emma glanced at him quickly, then at Claire, as if testing whether the fragile magic of their mornings could survive his presence. We were just talking, she said almost defensively. About waffles, Claire added with a teasing grin. And how mine are better than your dad's? Nathan raised an eyebrow. That's a bold claim. I stand by it, Claire replied. Emma smirked faintly, and for the first time in months, Nathan felt the air between them wasn't heavy. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Still, when he later discovered a folded note tucked into Emma's desk drawer, her careful handwriting spelling out, Thank you for making me happy again. Please never leave, he felt the full truth crash over him. His daughter's fragile happiness, her return to laughter, rested entirely on Claire's presence. And in that realization lay both fear and hope. Fear that Claire might one day walk away, but hope that for now, she had chosen to stay. Nathan knew he could no longer deny what was plain before him. Claire had given Emma something priceless. Connection. Something he, despite all his efforts, had failed to restore. And though a part of him still wrestled with envy, another part deeper, more vulnerable, was simply grateful. Because for the first time since the accident, mornings in the Carter house no longer felt like survival. They felt like beginnings. The night was quiet, the kind of stillness that made the walls of the Carter mansion seem larger than they were. Nathan had retired to his study, as he often did, burying himself in the glow of his laptop screen while the rest of the house drifted into sleep. Upstairs, Emma was curled beneath her blankets, her sketchbook on the nightstand, her nightlight casting a soft, golden halo over the room. Everything seemed calm, until the silence broke. It started as a muffled cry, faint enough that Nathan nearly dismissed it as the house settling. But then came a sharper sound, a strangled gasp that carried the unmistakable note of panic. Across the hall, Claire Johnson was already awake, instinct guiding her feet down the corridor. Before her mind had even caught up, When she pushed Emma's door open, the sight froze her in place. The little girl tangled in her sheets, twisting violently, as if trying to escape something. Unseen, her small voice caught in a desperate plea. "Emma," Claire whispered firmly, rushing to her side. She touched the girl's shoulder, and Emma jerked awake with a sob, her cheeks wet, her eyes wide with terror. She clutched at Claire with surprising strength, pressing her face against her chest as though she could hide there from the ghosts chasing her. "It's all right, sweetheart," Claire murmured, pulling her close, rocking her gently as if she were much younger than 8. "You're safe. It was only a dream. I've got you." Her words were steady, a quiet rhythm against Emma's shallow breaths. Nathan appeared in the doorway moments later, his hair disheveled, dressed in a plain t-shirt and sweatpants. He froze at the threshold, watching his daughter cling desperately to another woman's embrace. His hands flexed uselessly at his sides. For the first time in months, he saw her break open, saw the storm inside her come spilling out, and realized with crushing weight that she hadn't chosen him to hold her through it. It was the crash. Emma sobbed into Claire's shirt, her voice muffled but raw. "I couldn't reach Mommy. She was calling me, and I couldn't move. I couldn't save her." The words cut through Nathan like a blade. He felt his chest tighten, memories flashing in. Jagged fragments, twisted metal, the acrid scent of gasoline, the silence after the chaos. He had buried those images under endless work, endless distractions, convincing himself that not a Black's speaking of the accident would spare his daughter more pain. But now he saw how wrong he had been. The pain hadn't left. It had settled inside her, festering in silence, erupting in dreams, too heavy for a child to carry alone. Claire's hold on Emma tightened just slightly, her chin resting on the crown of the girl's head. "You don't have to reach her now, baby," she whispered. "She knows you love her. She always knew." Emma shook her head violently. "I couldn't move. She was calling me, but I couldn't move." Another sob racked her small frame. Nathan took a step forward, his voice unsteady. "Live, Emma." But Claire's steady gaze cut across the space between them, not accusing, but clear. "She needs you to let this out. Don't stop her. Don't make it about you." Nathan swallowed hard and stayed where he was, though every muscle in his body screamed to take his daughter into his arms. He didn't know if she would even let him. Claire's voice wove through the room like a thread pulling torn fabric together. "Sometimes, our minds make us relive things, even when we're not ready. It feels real all over again, but it isn't. You're here now, Emma. You're safe. The crash is over. It can't hurt you anymore." Emma's sobs quieted into hiccups, though she didn't release her grip on Claire. Gently, Claire reached for the blanket at the foot of the bed and wrapped it around both of them, creating a small cocoon of warmth. Nathan took another hesitant step closer, lowering himself until he could rest a hand lightly on his daughter's back. "I'm here too, Emma," he whispered, his voice breaking despite himself. "I'm not going anywhere." She didn't look at him, didn't move toward him, but she didn't pull away either. For Nathan, that sliver of trust was both heartbreaking and miraculous. Minutes passed, marked only by the steady rhythm of Claire's humming and Emma's gradually calming breaths. When her grip finally loosened, Claire eased her gently back against the pillows, brushing damp curls from her forehead. "Do you want to talk more about it?" she asked softly. Emma shook her head, exhausted. "Then we'll just sit here a while," Claire said, her tone so calm it sounded like a promise. She hummed again, a simple, wordless melody that seemed to wrap around the girl like a lullaby. Nathan recognized it. It was the same tune Claire had used once before, in the elevator after the birthday party. Emma's eyelids drooped, her small hand still tangled in Claire's shirt. "Don't go far," she whispered hoarsely, though her eyes were nearly closed. "I won't," Claire promised. Nathan echoed it silently, vowing to himself he would never again let her face the storm alone. When Emma finally drifted back into sleep, Claire eased herself free, smoothing the blanket up to her chin. She turned toward the doorway, where Nathan still stood, his face shadowed by more than the dim light. For a moment, their eyes locked. His carried the rawness of a man who had just been forced to face his own failure. Hers carried steady understanding, not judgment. "She's stronger than she knows," Claire said quietly as she passed him. Nathan nodded, but the words caught in his throat. He wanted to thank her, to confess, gratitude and shame twisting inside him, but all that came out was a rough, "thank you." That night, Nathan didn't return to his study or his bed. He sat in the dark, replaying Emma's Words, I couldn't reach Mommy, until they burrowed into his soul. For months, he had run from the memories, convincing himself that silence would protect both of them. But Claire had shown him the truth. Healing doesn't come from avoidance. It comes from facing the pain together. And for the first time since the accident, Nathan admitted to himself that he wasn't just avoiding Emma's ghosts. He was avoiding his own. The morning air carried the promise of something new as Nathan Carter suggested a small outing. He spoke casually, as though it were nothing more than a whim, but in truth, he had thought about it for days, choosing the waterfront park in the city because it was close enough, open enough, and perhaps safe enough for Emma to find joy again. At the breakfast table, she hesitated when he mentioned it, her spoon tracing slow circles in her cereal. But then Claire Johnson, seated across from her, smiled gently. I've never been there either, she said. Maybe we could all go together. That one word together shifted something in Emma's expression. She shrugged, which for her was as close to a yes as anyone could hope for. The drive into the city was quiet at first, the hum of tires filling the space between them. Claire sat in the back with Emma, pointing out bakeries with oversized signs and murals, splashed with wild colors. Slowly, Emma leaned toward the window, curiosity edging out. Silence. By the time they arrived at the waterfront, her eyes followed the tall masts of boats, rocking in the marina. You can smell the water, she murmured. Claire grinned. Smells like adventure. Nathan unfolded the wheelchair with practiced hands, but it was Claire who walked beside Emma, matching her pace as they rolled toward the pier. Vendors sold roasted nuts and lemonade, families strolled with strollers, and gulls wheeled overhead. A man selling small bags of bread waved them over. Claire pressed a few bills into his hand and gave the bag to Emma. They might come close, she said softly. But you're the one in charge. Emma hesitated before tossing a small piece of bread into the air. A gull swooped down, catching it mid-flight. Her eyes widened. Another toss, another dive. Soon she was leaning forward, laughing freely, flinging larger pieces into the sky. The sound of her laughter, clear and unrestrained, rang across the pier. Nathan leaned against the railing, his throat tight as he watched. It wasn't a polite giggle or a careful smile, it was the kind of laughter that lived in the law. The bones, the kind he feared he might never hear again. He looked at Claire, who was laughing too, her hand resting lightly on the back of Emma's chair. The sight struck him, harder than he expected. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper, something warmer, rising in his chest. Later that evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Nathan found a small envelope tucked into her desk drawer. Inside, in uneven letters, were the words, "Thank you for making me happy. Again. Please never leave." He stared at the note for a long time, his thumb brushing over the gashiness. Fragile handwriting. The plea wasn't only Emma's, it echoed something within him as well. For the first time since the accident, Nathan allowed himself to believe that healing wasn't just possible. It was already happening, right here, with Claire at the center of it. The mansion was quiet, except for the faint hum of the laundry machines. Nathan Carter had been on his way to the garage to find a misplaced tool when a fragment of conversation stopped him cold. Through the half-closed door of the laundry room, he heard Claire Johnson's low voice, careful and restrained. Yes, it's a live-in position. In California, she said. There was a pause, as though she were listening to the person on the other end of the line. Then her voice dropped further. I understand. I'll need to think about it. Nathan's chest tightened, the words heavy as stone. He didn't wait to hear the rest. Moving quickly down the hall, he tried to shake the knot forming in his stomach. It was just a phone call, just a possibility, he told himself. But the thought of Claire leaving, of Emma losing the one person who had coaxed joy back into her life, was unbearable. All day, he caught himself watching Claire without meaning to, searching her face for signs of decision, reading into her silences. It wasn't Nathan, though, who brought the fear into the open. That evening, while Claire helped Emma into pajamas, the little girl's small voice wavered. Are you leaving? Claire froze, her hands stilling on the hem of the shirt she was adjusting. Where did you hear that? She asked gently. One of the kids at school said they heard you on the phone, Emma whispered, her eyes already glassy with tears. Nathan, standing just outside the doorway, felt the shift in the air. Claire sat on the edge of the bed, facing her fully. I did get a phone call about another job, she admitted. But I haven't made any decisions yet. Emma's face crumpled. But you could go. Her voice cracked on the last word. Claire reached for her hands, holding them lightly between her own. I could, she said. Honestly. But I haven't decided if I want to. The honesty wasn't enough for Emma. Tears spilled freely now, sliding down her cheeks. You made me happy again, she cried, clutching Claire's hands tighter. If you go, I'll stop. Smiling. I know I will. The words landed like a punch, and Nathan felt his own breath falter. It was the truth. Painfully, beautifully true. Claire had become the thread stitching Emma's fractured world back together. Without her, Nathan feared it would unravel all over again. Claire brushed the back of Emma's hand in slow circles, her own eyes glistening. Hey, she whispered, leaning closer until their foreheads touched. You're stronger than you think. You won't stop smiling forever, not even if things changed. She hesitated, then shook her head as if the words themselves were too cruel to finish. But maybe things don't have to change. Emma's sobs quieted into shaky breaths, though she clung to Claire's hand as if letting go would mean losing her. Promise me, she whispered. I promise I'll be here, Claire said softly. I won't disappear. Not without talking to you first. And I'll be there for your recital next month. That's a promise too. Emma nodded, finally allowing herself to lean back against the pillows. Her eyelids drooped, exhaustion tugging her under, but her hand didn't loosen until sleep claimed her. Nathan still stood in the doorway, watching the scene with something caught between relief and awe. He had heard Claire's words, seen the decision settling in her eyes. She hadn't said it outright, but it was clear enough, she wasn't leaving. Not now. When Claire rose to leave the room, their eyes met. She didn't explain, didn't offer the same promises to Nathan that she had given Emma. But something in her gaze told him everything he needed to know. The call to California had been real, but the choice was already leaning toward them, toward this fragile little family they were building together. Nathan stepped aside to let her pass, the weight in his chest loosening just slightly. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that Claire wasn't just staying for Emma, she was staying because this, here, mattered to her too. The day of the picnic arrived with sunlight spilling across the waterfront park. Emma's laughter rose above the sound of gulls and rushing waves, her joy so pure it seemed to echo against the sky itself. Nathan Carter watched her run her fingers through the grass, her wheelchair set aside for a moment of freedom. While Claire Johnson sat nearby, her gaze soft, her smile effortless. When the time felt right, Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it slowly, revealing a silver locket. Inside was a photo, Emma in the center, Nathan on one side, and Claire on the other, their smiles captured in a moment that spoke more than words could. Claire's breath caught Nathan. He placed it gently in her hand. You're not just here to help us. You're a part of us now. Not an employee. Not a guest. Family. And that's forever. Emma, hearing the words, reached for both their hands and clasped them tightly together. Now it's complete, she whispered. And for the first time in years, Nathan felt the truth. His home wasn't silent anymore. It was alive, stitched together with laughter, love, and second chances. No matter how deep the loss, love has the power to heal. Patience and kindness can rebuild broken hearts, turning strangers into family, and restoring joy where it once seemed impossible. Sometimes, the people we least expect become the ones who save us. What about you? Have you ever met someone who changed your life just by being there? Share your story in the comments. And if this touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow so you never miss more stories of hope and healing.